We all know what's right. We all know what's wrong. There's no rocket science to this. Moral fiber, that's what I coin as knowing and acting on your values. Conscious capitalism. Well, a lot of companies, they have their values. The problem is they're not living their values. And companies are businesses. There's a P&L involved. I'm a strong believer in that. But how we do it makes the difference. People go, oh yeah, the Dalai Lama. No, it really is. Like, you feel it. I said to him, I don't know why, but I feel so angry. And he said to me, compassion. Compassion and wisdom. Wisdom will be your guide. He said, you can learn from your greatest enemy. And then he whispered in my ear, and he said, your greatest enemy is in you.
This week on the show, we have my very good friend. His name is SHAWN VIJ, and he is author of the book Moral Fiber, which has a foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And SHAWN is a great friend of mine. I met him in 1990 when I was 19 years old. We both worked at Ford Motor Company, and we took very different paths, but they were both paths where we really wanted success so bad. We probably had a lot of greed, and yet a few years ago, we all came to a different conclusion, was that he needed something else in his life, and so did I. For me, it was London Real. For him, it was actually meeting the Dalai Lama. It changed his life, and it made him want to talk about ethical behavior in the corporate world. And I'm so proud of the man that SHAWN has become. On this episode, we talk about what we were like as kids, why we were so obsessed with money and our own achievements, and how we've now found a different way of looking at the world. For me, it's London Real, and for him, it's this new book, Moral Fiber. I think you're gonna learn a lot, because you can believe in capitalism like I do, but doing it the right way. It's how you do it that's so important, and it's really embracing a lot of these values that Buddhism promotes, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but just good ethics at the end of the day. So you're really gonna enjoy this and his book. Super excited for you to meet Mr. SHAWN VIJ. We've got the fire engine coming out here. So we're gonna keep going straight. And what can I say? So if you wanna see the success secrets for that, you can download them on the website, or you can click on the link in the show notes. Also, coming very soon is London Real's Broadcast Yourself, where you get to learn how to create your very own London Reel. I'm gonna teach you exactly how to book guests, how to interview people, how to publish it on media, how to work the social media, how to get better as a show. I'm gonna teach you everything I've learned over the past 6 years, so stay tuned for that. And now I leave you with Mr. SHAWN VIJ, author of Moral Fiber, on London Real. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is SHAWN VIJ, an author and accomplished business leader with over 25 years of industry and consulting experience for Intel, Microsoft, Ford Motor Company, and Visa. Your book, Moral Fiber, Awakening Corporate Consciousness, is described by John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, as a beautiful journey of how capitalism and compassion must coexist to improve our human condition. It has a foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's become a good friend of yours in the past 3 years. But most importantly, I'm featured on pages 178 and 179, the story of London Real, so grab a copy. SHAWN, you've been one of my best friends since we met in 1990 as summer interns for Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan. Welcome to London Real.
Thanks, Brian.
It's great to have you here.
It's great.
I can remember like it was yesterday, the two of us hanging out in that cubicle in Dearborn, Michigan, wearing bad khaki pants, cheap ties, white shirts. We were driving around in those cars they would give us to go from like one plant to the next plant. We were kind of bright-eyed working at this company that had probably been our dreams because we were both mechanical engineers, or engineers. And I still remember hanging out with you. And you were SHAWN VIJ, a kid that was born in India but acted like a jock from the football team. You always had this cool energy about you. You were serious and yet a lot of fun. And I could even sense a little bit of compassion in there. And that's how I remember you, you know? And I was wondering what you remember about those days.
Well, I remember all that. I remember I dressed well and suspenders, and you had those khakis. But no, I remember back then it was different. I remember that was the first time I actually tried coffee because the job got really boring. Right? It got to a point it got boring, right? At some points, right? So let's be honest with that. And it was a summer internship, and they were courting us at the time. So I remember that. There was a lot of courting, and it was a lot of fun. We got to do some really cool things. I remember the racetrack. We were racing cars, and that was fun. I remember working on the plant floor, working in the plant, working with folks. But what was great about it is there was such a divide between union and what I would call the white-collar workers.
Right, white-collar
and blue-collar. And my first internship was kind of in between working those two environments. So I remember that there was that divisiveness there. And just being the intern there was listening to both sides. And so I remember a lot of that and, you know, trying to be I don't want to call it a negotiator, but like an arbitrator in some way.
Yeah, and you talk about that in the book, about like bringing them Indian food from your mom and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But for people that don't know, and I'm sure it's probably maybe like that still, but maybe not as much, but you know, when you get to the plant where this is real talk, they manufacture cars, they manufacture engine blocks. Like the guys that do that are kind of the blue collar workers, and they're in unions and they hang out with each other and they work repetitive jobs a lot of time, hard work, sometimes it's creative. But then you got the engineers, which are the college graduates, which are in the other buildings. And I dealt a little bit with it, but you dealt a lot more with it.
Yeah, I think so. I think you were more on I can't remember which area you were in, but we had the same offices in the same area, but I was more going to the plant floor a lot on the manufacturing side, and you were more on the design, product design. And I think the next summer I came, it was so exciting. I came the next summer and I worked in more product design. And actually that was more exciting. So my first role was it was boring in the sense of, when I say boring, it wasn't as challenging initially, right? The challenging part was more people-oriented than actual work-oriented. And then the next summer was more challenging in the sense of I started doing what they called calibration, so electronic engine control in the cars, and so I got into that space.
But I think both of us realized early on, maybe took you a few years more, that this was great and this was a dream, but we didn't want to be like the guys that were 40 years old and they were the career Ford guys, right?
Right.
And so you saw that early, and I saw that early, and I went kind of the Wall Street way. You ended up going to get an MBA and kind of ended up in time going out west.
Yeah,
right?
It's interesting. Talk about that, you know, the path and the journey. I noticed you went more into financial. Well, one, it's interesting because we'll talk about it, hopefully. But one, we were both, I wouldn't call it greedy, but we were going after monetary things at the time. Right?
Yeah.
And you were going toward Wall Street.
We were greedy.
We were greedy. You were going toward Wall Street, and I went toward consulting. And I went, I mean, whatever I could, cap out at, right? And most MBA students do that, right? You'll see most of them go into consulting or financial services or investment banking. And I went that path. I went to Ernst & Young in Chicago, and I worked with a lot of folks there. And so that was good. And then I moved out west, and then I got a flavor of high tech. And that's where I got really excited, right? So living in the Bay Area, it's just an incubator of all kinds of new things and great things happening. And so I just fell into that whole world. And that was in 2000, right? That was right when, or 99, yeah.
Right when.
Yeah. But getting back to earlier, what you were talking about, we got to remember when we were at Ford, right? It was also hard times. It was the 80s, right? And market share for Ford was at like 35% right?
Right.
And then it was just on a decline. The Japanese were coming in hard. I mean, so you've got a lot of that dynamic playing out too. And so that's why, getting back to the blue collar, white collar, it got a little bit more divisive. And that's what I started in the plant floor. I started noticing that rub even more, and I was feeling it.
Right. And even then you started making some ways of identifying with those people, right? And you became good friends with some of those guys. Well,
yeah, it was interesting. I mean, when I first took the job, my manager at the time said, "Look, I need you to go monitor machinery." And I'm like, "You want me to go out there with those guys, these union guys who've worked, and like, yeah, why aren't you guys doing that?" Right? So I had to figure out a way to collaborate, right? And there was a thing called, at the time, SPC. It was a big quality one, right? Statistical process control. Yeah. And so I had to go out there and monitor machinery, bring it back. But I got to know the people, and I had to figure out ways of how do I get to know these people, because they were not I was 19. They're not my friend, right? They weren't my friend at first. And so I was just really, it was a great experience, because it really challenged me on how do I start collaborating with these people? How do I start working with guys who are, in their 40s and 50s at the time, right?
Yeah. There's a point in the book where you talk about you kind of go from making 30 grand to getting that offer for, 6 figures. And you're like, wait a second, I go from a place where my walls don't have anything on them to now I can go to the big time. And, I remember that same moment for me where I was like, oh my gosh, now I'm making the money, the big time. And, it changes us as kind of individuals. Is that a rite of passage? Is that something that all young men are going to go to when they're out there trying to grab the most out of life? I mean, if you could do it over again, would you do it differently? Because you reflect on those moments in the book as, learning moments for you, right?
Yeah, they're learning moments. It was a moment, I mean, I don't regret any of that. I totally enjoyed it, but a lot of it comes from our influences and how we were raised and what we value. The book is, it's moral fiber. It's knowing and acting on your values. So knowing what our values are, and what do we value depends on the environment we're in and who we're with, right? And you've said it a lot too, right? I mean, we are what we consume. And so if I'm consuming Kim Kardashian or whatever that is, 24 hours, nothing wrong with that, right? But you start thinking in a certain way, right? So the diversity of thought is so critical. And so in the book, I talk about, okay, so forget all those influences. I call them cultural hinges and societal strings. These are all influences. But there's one thing that we all share together. We all share this. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, talks about it. And and there's a lot of research around it. John Haidt from New York. There's Mary Gentile, who's also in the book, from Darden School of Business, who's written a lot of books on values. But they've done a lot of studies, and they've identified 4 or 5 key core values: fairness, respect, compassion, honesty, trust. I mean, these are things. I mean, His Holiness, his number one thing, if you go to his website, is promoting values, human values. Yeah. And he talks about tolerance, he talks about forgiveness, he talks about compassion. And so to me, I just feel like a vessel in this book. Like I felt like it was something that just had to be written, especially in this, having spent 25 years, right? So I feel like just a vessel, like that's one thing that could help us. And that's what I did. You go back to the story, on the plant floor, right? How did I get along with these guys? There was this guy, Gino, he was a welder. He just never wanted to talk to me, right? And so I just went to the core common thing, right, of just respect. And I had food from, Indian food, and he's an Italian guy, and I thought, hey, he might like some different foods, and I'd give him food every day, for like, every day I'd drop food, and he'd be like, prick, you know, and like it was just, and then finally the 6th, 7th day, I think it was, or a week later, he started talking. We opened up, and he told me his son was dying, right? And that hit me, right? But that was where the hurt was, right? That vulnerability came out, but the thing that opened that door was compassion.
Right.
And so that anyways, yeah.
And the Dalai Lama always talks about, as humans, the thing we have in common is we have suffering, and we're trying to minimize that suffering. And so you're looking at, as a base human level, how are we all the same? And you're trying to go in at that angle, and you seem like you always had that in you, something.
Yeah, and I lost that, right?
Because you started listening to kind of the Kardashian way, or the other things that were influenced. Why?
Yeah, right. I mean, like you, Brian. I mean, like you, I mean, you reflect. I mean, why did you go to Wall Street?
Yeah,
what were the things that drove you?
You know, I wanted to compete with the best, and like that's where the action was, quite honestly. And I think if it had been in the 80s, it would have been the oil business, and if it would have been now, it might have been in tech, or 10 years ago. So I think that's where I was like, that's where it's gonna be. So definitely the money was something that was always important for me.
Yeah.
Definitely, because I think the American dream, or at least the one that I grew up in, it was all about that. And so I figured if I could get that, I would then have my happiness. And that's maybe your story, and maybe so many people's story. And like, it's funny, I got a barbershop around here. I go to this Turkish barbershop, and he's always playing these MTV when I get my hair cut. And I never watch MTV anymore. And I'm always like, dude, you're watching this all day long because it's the bling and the cars and it's all this stuff repeated. And I'm like, I guess that's what I grew up on, that it's all about this without questioning why. And then I think we both got to a point in our lives, in our maybe late 30s or mid 30s, where some of this doesn't feel right. Maybe I'm making decisions in a corporate world that doesn't feel right, yet my compass says, get more money, so you got to do it.
Right.
And then at some point, I think we have this dilemma where it's like, wait a second, that's not what I want to do anymore.
Right. And it's what I call your inner voice, your conscience, right? And what causes, for me at least, I can talk about myself, what causes me, I mean, suffering is a strength. And that's how His Holiness looks at it. He practices suffering.
Right.
He practices it. When he doesn't suffer, he takes the suffering of others onto him.
I remember reading his book.
Because it builds,
Yeah, he
builds
says when
tolerance.
he meditates, he tries to take the suffering of the world on. Is that right?
Yeah, so a lot of Buddhist monks do that. That's their, I mean, well, we won't get into monks and the rebirth of monks, but His Holiness he practices that, and I start practicing that. And I meditate every day now, and I try to take on the suffering. I mean, I'm not going to invite everybody and let me suffer for everybody, but I try to take on as much as I can, because it builds tolerance, it builds compassion, and it builds, you're able to, at least slowly I've been able to navigate better. I'm more mindful about things. I'm more aware about things. I bring different vantage points when I think, when I look at others suffering. There's an empathy. And that's what I get into. I don't really talk about it in the book, but it's an overarching theme, is compassionate leadership. And that's something, mindfulness was a big buzzword, and, all these new, but compassionate leadership is the next big thing, right? And so when you think of that, compassionate leadership is not about, oh, let me give you a hug. It's about, if you don't do your job, you're accountable, and if you don't do it, you're fired. You're let go. I'm a strong believer in that. But you need to let's not be ignorant about it, right? You need to be open about it. And I talk about that in the book also, about the 4 Ds, and I talk about, anger, greed, and ignorance, and it's a blend of things that I bring in that, and that's what Buddhists really believe, that it's the poisonous cocktail. Anger, greed, and ignorance.
These
are the three things, and there's derivatives of that, right? So you mix them, they play off of each other, right? Okay. And they exist in all of us, right? And the degree depends. I mean, you talk about how I got back to myself. I mean, these influences and all of these things, right? They can lead to greater anger. They can lead to greater greed. Your self-interest takes over. And that's where the rub comes in, when you start conflicting with your own conscience. And you're like, and then I talk about it in the book again, is ethical fading, right? It's this psychic numbing that Professor Tenbrizol in Notre Dame talks about. And there's lots of studies on this, right? Yeah. So there's no one to blame, right? We have to take an introspective view.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And those three kind of toxic things, do we just need to always be aware of them? Is that?
That's the key. We should be aware of them. You know, and there's a process I use, right? And I'm
Tell me.
So I kind of put it in the book, but I wanted to make it simple, just a framework, right? And so people can, because one of the things about the book is there's nothing preachy about it. I'm not here to preach anything. It was my experiences and other corporate executives and leaders, and I interviewed everybody from the janitor all the way up, right? Everybody's in the book, professors. But I wanted a book where I'm not complaining, and I wanted a book that's helpful, right? Like somebody who can read this, and like somebody on a plane, a businessman can read and go, yeah, I do that. Oh, wow, right. It starts opening windows and doors for them, right?
Right.
And so the framework I have is, I go into just two frameworks, but the most simplest one is what I call accepting the emotion, right? Accept your emotion. The Dalai Lama says this. In fact, he says he was the angriest. He was growing up, he was very, things would, he would snap.
Right.
Especially his territory where he grew up in China, right? So the accepting the emotion is key, right? Because that drives greater awareness, that you're aware of the anger coming in, right?
Yeah.
And then it's about not letting it build, right? So cloister the emotion, right? So take that emotion and then get surgical with it. Try to identify what was the cause of that. And so what's required there is self-awareness and being aware and understanding all the different vantage points of what could have caused that. Maybe it was me, right? Maybe it was somebody else. What caused that anger? Or maybe it was, my child who was sick the night before, and they caused me to be angry, and I was deflecting, right? And then the third part is tempering that emotion. And it's funny because, and this was the aha moment for me on tempering the emotion, was most of us when we're angry, the last thing we would think of is using compassion to temper that emotion, right?
Right.
But it actually works.
Even when you're angry.
Even when you're angry. It's hard to believe, but it actually works. Practice that.
Have compassion for the person you're angry at.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And just so give me an example of that. So you get mad at someone and you're thinking, well, how are they receiving this? They might not understand. They might not be aware that they're making me angry, that kind of thing.
So an example would be, like I just mentioned it, but there's, at work, I was in a situation where I just snapped at somebody. And my daughter was, she kept me up, this was way back when she was younger, but she was sick. And, I just got angry at the individual, right? And, I took a moment and I stepped away from it. And I started realizing, I just did this kind of process, if you will. I kind of accepted that emotion. But the anger had built so much, I was getting mad at everybody. It wasn't just him. After I got mad at him, I just started getting mad at everybody and everything at work that day, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a simple thing, but it's in that practice, right?
Yeah. It's kind of observing yourself.
Which
is kind of a lot what meditation does, and Buddhism says, like, observe
Yes.
yourself and think about the others. And it's just not many people really put it into practical business terms, which is what it seems to me you're trying to do with this book, and give examples of you. I know you're trying not to preach. You're saying, look, I went through this. I went through this place where there was this strange situation at work. I didn't like it. I was going to partnership with these guys. I didn't like the way they partied. And that told me a lot about what their character was. And difficult situations that everybody faces in the corporate world. And unfortunately, a lot of times we don't make the quote unquote right decision because sometimes it's unpopular. And that's tricky sometimes.
Yeah. And we don't know. Like you talked about, the partying, we were in Southern California at the time, closing one of the biggest deals. And when the guy pulled out a bunch of cocaine next to me, I'm like, and I drink a lot, but I don't, when I'm out and I have a good time, but that one just didn't go with me. Right. And so I didn't know what to do at that point. And so I talk about it in the book.
Yeah.
I won't tell you here, but
you have to get the book. But it was interesting because you could have said, oh, it's just them partying. It's one night, let them celebrate the deal. But then you're like, all right, you're watching how they behave and you're like, well, these guys we want to be in business with. And it's, you start asking some hard questions, but it sounds like good questions. And in the long run, it sounds like you guys made the right call.
Right,
So, but again, you kind of have to really come back to your own values, and you have to be disciplined about enforcing your own values, right? Which is hard.
It's hard. And Yeah, and I see it a lot. I mean, there's times, I've been asked, look, I started like right there, right? Like, and then I was able to progress in my career, which was nice. And I continue that. But the real question I asked myself as I was gone on this journey was I really happy? You talk about it earlier, like you want these things, right? Don't get me wrong, I like staying at the Savoy, right? I enjoy these things. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, right? But the difference is how I got there is very different than how I got there before. That's the difference. It makes me want to enjoy the Savoy even more.
Right.
I want other people to enjoy. I believe in capitalism and free trade, but how we go about it when, I got it in the epigraph in the book. I talk about that. If I'm taking happiness away from somebody else and I'm exploiting that because my self-interest takes over somebody else's, and I do something unethical, right, or against the core values, we've gone in the wrong direction.
Yeah. The Dalai Lama is a big figure in this book. So can you talk to me about how this relationship started? Because, it kicks off February 24th, 2014, 7:32 a.m. You're at a hotel in downtown San Jose. What's about to happen?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I talk about it in the book in the end, how I met the Dalai Lama. And what was about to happen at that moment was I was going to take a cargo elevator up to the 15th floor and meet with His Holiness for 15 minutes, which I did. A business guy who happened to get there. And it was one of these where the night before I was having dinner, and well, let me roll it back a little bit.
Yeah.
So it was end of January. You talked about it like it was a pivotal moment for you when you were in Richard Branson's. It's very similar. I was actually in the bonus room of our house, and I'm sitting there, and it was a Friday evening, and I'm eating a cold sandwich. And mind you, I live in a 3,500 square foot home. I got all these things. I got cars, 2-car garage, all this stuff, right? Suits, all these things. And I'm sitting there all alone. Wife's gone, daughter's gone. And I've got this huge big screen TV. And I just started feeling like the loneliest person ever. And I didn't want to look at myself. There was like a mirror in my head, and I didn't want to look at myself. And I don't know, it's just something came over me, and it was one of these where I started feeling I was at the worst condition in my health. My marriage was suffering. I lost a lot of my friends. You and I didn't really even converse until after I met the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
So I lost even my closest family, like my parents and my brother. I was very distant. My job was very toxic. I had a boss that was coming after me all the time. Everybody's watching this. I can guarantee you, they're not happy. A lot of people in their jobs. It got so toxic, and so all of these things, right, just imploded, and I just started getting really I literally physically then started getting hives and kind of so I started walking around looking for an answer, right? And I walked around the house and I went into the guest bedroom and I opened up a little drawer and I opened the drawer and there's this little pocketbook on the Dalai Lama. And I never opened that. I didn't even know, the irony was I got that book maybe 8 years ago on a whim. I just kind of bought it, and I never read it, never opened it, didn't even know. So I opened the book, and I was literally not feeling. I was just at the lowest point, right? Depressed and I opened the book, and I turned to a page, and the page was about suffering, and how suffering can be your greatest strength, and that just kind of an awakening happened at that moment. And I started reading more. And I couldn't stop reading. So I read the whole pocketbook. And then the next day, I went to Barnes & Noble's and I started reading all about the Dalai Lama. and it was just kind of fulfilling, right? It just kind of soothed me. And then
and you weren't into Buddhism or Dalai Lama before that.
Like I mean, I'm just like, what is this stuff, right? And I was just never into it. And then I then at that point, I just was at Pete's Coffee, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a search. So I did a Google search, and I said Dalai Lama, and he doesn't come to the U.S. much. And then it said, just announced he's going to be at Berkeley. And I'm like, oh, so I'm like trying to buy tickets, right? So I'm clicking on that thing, and it's like sold out. Like it was like a Seahawks game. And then like you got 5,000 people, it's gone, right? Then I do another one. Then it says, oh, another announcement comes up 3 hours later. He's going to be at UC Santa Clara. So I'm like, I'll click on that, and I was able to get 2 tickets, right? And got the 2 tickets. And remember, this is a venue of 2,000 people, right? So I'm like, okay. So I'm like, this is not going to be enough for me. This is not, you know how I think, right? So I'm like, this is not enough. So I call Santa Clara and I go, I'm going through a personal crisis, and and I said, I'd like to really kind of meet with the Dalai Lama. And she's like, really? Really? And I said, yeah, I really want to meet with the Dalai Lama. And, I was really, she's like, okay. And she's like, sure. And so then I said, this is not going to happen, right? So I let it go, right? I let it go. And then a week later, I get, this is a span in 3 weeks, right? To get to that 7:32 in the morning.
Yeah.
And then, so there's some cosmic energy or something, but I just let it go, and I read more about the Dalai Lama. I read more about Buddhism, and then I get an email, a generic email that says, use your certificates at a hotel before they get voided out, right? So I just booked that hotel. And it just happened to be the hotel His Holiness was staying at. So I get there on, it was a Sunday night, and I get there on Sunday night, and I'm with my brother, who you've met, and with one of his buddies, and we're having drinks, and we're having sushi at the lobby, and this is like a very, like a lot of the high-tech folks hang out in this hotel, and we were having drinks, and then in the corner of my eye, I see later on, half bottle into the wine, we're all having fun. I see a monk sitting on this couch, and I go, and something just told me at that point to kind of go over there, because I was really kind of hurting inside, and I don't know. And as I walked over there, the crowd just came, and I decided to walk back. I said, forget it, right? So then I went back again. And when I went back again, the crowd just kind of moved over. Everybody was nice. And I literally just kind of went to one knee, and I started talking to him. And I'm talking and talking. And then the lady next to me hits me and says, he doesn't understand English. And I'm like, all right. And so then they had a translator, and they translated, and I was there for 40 minutes, right? Telling him my story and sharing everything. And he was holding my hand. He said, be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow, or 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, or 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. So I show up the next morning, and I'm there, and that's what happened. And so I meet the Dalai Lama. He made that meeting happen, and ever since then, I've met the Dalai Lama. I work with his office. The next year, I met with him with my parents in LA. So I got my parents to meet with him, and then the last year, I met with him with my daughter, and that was such a joy.
Yeah, you sent me pictures.
Yeah, and that was beautiful.
So I remember getting pictures from you, and it's Vij and the Dalai Lama, and I'm like, my email, and I'm like, what the heck is this? And then I was like, of course Vij meets the Dalai Lama, because I don't know. That's like something I would expect you to do. But he said some things to you when you met him, and I think they're super important things. And I'm curious, first of all, what's it like to meet him? He's such a powerful figure and represents so much. What's it like?
Yeah. Well, I was going through that moment. When I met with him, it was one of these, people go, oh yeah, the Dalai Lama. No, it really is. Like, you feel it. You feel the energy. And the energy is powerful. It's all good energy. It's, when I went there, I felt like I felt calm, like in a world of equanimity. It was just calm, balanced. Like everybody's guard was down. He has that. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's the 3 hours or 4 hours of meditation he does every day, but it's just calm. with the exception of the Secret Service. But everybody else was calm. And yeah, when I met with him, I touched his feet. Something told me to touch his feet. I felt like touching. In India, you do that. You just, as my parents and grandparents, as a sign of respect.
Okay.
So that's something that, it's common, right?
You remember that?
I remember touching his feet, and then he lifted me up, and I said to him, I don't know why, but I feel so angry. I feel so angry. And he said to me, now I'm thinking about it, and he said to me, he goes, compassion and wisdom. Wisdom will be your guide. And I said, wisdom will be my guide? And he said, yes, wisdom will be your guide. And then he gave me a book. And he signed it and everything, but he gave me this book and he told me to read 3 chapters, chapter 6, 7, and 9. I won't tell anybody the book, but it's chapter 6, 7, and 9. And chapter 9 was on wisdom. So I got the book. I actually got it from London. I had to order it from here because they didn't offer it in the U.S. Okay. So I ordered the book, got the book, and then it will be your guide, and yeah. So that wisdom was the key for me. And then
and you didn't know why. You were like, my guide to what? And you weren't quite sure what he was talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know what he was talking about, and I think when you get into, when I talk about it a little bit more, but it was an awakening, but it was really about awareness, right? And getting that greater awareness. Right now, you're so angry because you're not seeing everything. You're not seeing all the other vantage points.
Right.
You're only anchored on one right now.
Okay.
So let the wisdom be your guide in that, right? And I said to him, he said, your greatest enemy, you can learn from your greatest enemy.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, and I said, okay, and then he whispered in my ear, and he said, your greatest enemy is in you. And that's when I said, like, you're my master. And then he did this, and he goes, you are your own master, right? And I was like, wow, like this, it was just too much at once, right? It was like so intense, right?
So deep.
It was really deep, and then I'm like, this is and then I'm like 20 minutes later, I'm in a venue of 2,000 people, and I'm standing there watching him, and I go, I just met this guy. Like, my brother has like 30 shots of photos of this, and he's like, and the lady behind us is like, you just met the Dalai Lama? And I'm like thinking to myself, going, I've got to do something more. I'm not going to just sit here and take that energy and let it go. So I struggled, right? like, well, what can I do at that point? And that has changed my life completely. I mean, it's changed my life completely.
The meeting changed it completely.
The meeting, the everything that evolved from that meeting, the things I've done, my attitude toward myself, my attitude toward others. I feel like I'm back to myself when I actually kind of first met you, right? Like, yeah. I feel like I'm back to that. I don't know how you feel, but I feel like I'm back to myself with that. And it's funny because we didn't really stay in touch for those, 15 years or so, and then. We were both, I would say we were both kind of lost, and then at least that's what I remember, right?
Yeah,
I remember, meeting you in San Diego, and, we were just like, you were definitely a rebel, right? Like crazy. I don't know if you were angry, but you were rebellious. And I remember that. You were very rebellious. We used to wear these boots up to here, military boots, and I was just like, okay, what's going on, right? And just always, we drink a lot.
Yeah.
And we did some crazy stuff, and we followed. I mean, I went into that consulting, and you went. But yeah, I remember that. And then now I see you, and I see different attitude, right? A different approach, positive energy. Like, I felt it yesterday when I knew I was coming in from Lisbon, and I felt it when I got landed here. It wasn't London. It was like, I'm going to be meeting a friend. I felt that energy.
Yeah.
It's weird.
I think, and you have changed. Well, you've kind of gotten back to the Vij I remember I met, but like, I think we were all both on our mission of, I don't know what it was. Okay, we're out there competing, acquiring, doing this thing, and maybe the reason I was drinking so much, or we were drinking so much, is because maybe, you know, our enemy was ourselves, you know, and this ambitious kind of greedy thing was also toxic within ourselves. And so I think for me, sometimes I wanted to get away from my inner critic. I think I'm always critical of myself. Why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you doing better? Why aren't you making more money? Why aren't you being successful? And then at the same time, I would try to quiet that voice by drinking sometimes, which of course made me less successful, which got me in this whole loop, you know. And then I think that's what was going on with me. And I think I was angry at a lot of things. And I took it out on myself. And so, like when the Dalai Lama says that to you, you are your master, and then the enemy is you. It's so true. And as soon as I figured out how to get out of my own way, I started seeing these rays of success and kind of mini enlightenments for me. But it wasn't until I really walked away from the whole banking business entirely that I really started learning.
But you were scared, right? I mean, let me ask you this, because I always wanted to ask you, like, I hear your story and everything, but like, what did you feel like when you left? I mean, for me, now I'm still in the corporate world. I still kind of, but this is to me is, what did you feel? I mean, you left it all, and you started something totally different, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot there, right, to leave. I mean, that takes a lot of courage, right?
Yeah. Well, people say it's courage. I don't know about courage. Funny enough, when I look back, I actually started meditating about 3 months before I left.
Okay.
It's weird. And I'd always heard about this meditation thing. I've been into martial arts, so I'd always, beat myself up and beat guys up. Now when I look back at it, in martial arts, when you're actually beating the hell out of a heavy bag, or you're going and beating someone up in a ring, now that I look back at it, you're almost beating yourself up. It's a weird way of that. So I was always into new ideas and new training, but meditation I'd never got my head around. And finally I took a transcendental meditation class, which means I paid a couple grand for it, which means, for not much, but it got me to do it. And so once I did it, I was like, I'm gonna do this. And I was doing my meditation twice a day, and all of a sudden I started looking around and I'm just like, what are you doing? You're going into this job that you hate. It's negative and toxic. People yell at you all day long. I'm trying to squeeze as much value out of everyone I meet. So all the banks, all of my colleagues in the firm, I'm just trying to extract as much value and cash out of them every single day. And I've been doing this for 10 years. Yeah. There's a knock-on toxic effect to that, right? And I look around, I don't have any friends. No one wants to be around me. I don't even want to be around myself to a certain extent. And yet, I was trying to pile more zeros into that bank account. And part of me said, wait a second, your bank account went up the last 3 months. Did your life change at all in a positive way? No. And it hasn't for 3 or 5 years. And yet but you got more money. Okay, cool. But you got more money, and your life sucks. I think finally I was able to say, I think because of the meditation, again, I think because I was able to observe myself, finally there was an observer that said, Brian, why are you doing this? And I think that's when I knew I had to go. And so once I kind of made that decision, it was scary that day. I felt a little bit wrench in my gut. I wanted to walk out of the place and throw my fingers in the air to all the guys, but one of the guys said, say goodbye to everybody. And I remember saying, like, fuck that, fuck these guys, fuck you. And which was again me hating me for my decisions. It wasn't them. And I remember I went and said goodbye to everybody, and that was a big move for me, and then walked out. That was a big day. I don't know if it was courageous or whatever, but that was that. And then luckily enough, I knew, don't go start a tech company, because you don't want to do an IPO and impress your friends. That's not what you want to do, Brian. And so I allowed myself to go on this kind of journey of discovery, which was when I started broadcasting.
It's amazing. It's great to see you, Brian, like this. I mean, like literally this is the first time walking in here. I remember us in this cubicles, and I'm like, gosh, we are so freaking old. But then I started looking, and I'm thinking, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. This is great. I'm really proud of you.
Thank you, man. And so now this changed my life, because it's a whole different energy. And now I always tell guys, now I try to pump as much value out in the world. Like, that's what I do. And with broadcasts, it's just like, let's put out this message, let's edit this video. Yeah. And we did it for 3 years without any money coming in. Yeah. But I loved it. And I remember every year I would look back and be like, Rose, you got to get a job. Like, what are you doing? This is stupid. And then everyone thinks you're an idiot. You're on YouTube and you're putting these hour-long videos out, and what are you doing? And not to mention all the banking colleagues laughing at me and all that stuff. But every year I said, is your life better? Yes. Do you have more friends? Yes. Are you happier? Yes. Are you attracting a family? Yes. So keep doing it. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. And then now it all makes sense. So now people are like, oh, look what you built with London Real. I was like, it wasn't like that. I was just one foot in front of the other and following the energy.
Yes.
So that's what.
Well, I would argue. I would even say, or not argue, but I would also. I talk about it also is what causes a lot of suffering, right? Is us not being. We cause, and His Holiness says this. We cause most of our suffering.
Yes.
And for me, another aha moment is being true to yourself. That's a hard thing. Let's be really real here. That is a hard thing to be true to yourself.
Explain that.
Well, I mean, the U.S. News did a study, right? And I'll just throw this out there, and they've asked people, the celebrities in the U.S. They asked, how many people, who do you think would go into heaven, right? And they just generically asked people, and it was a big study, and they said, I think it was like 50-some% said Bill Clinton would go to heaven, right? And then they said
52%.
52%,
according to your book.
According to the book.
Yeah.
Then it was something in the 58 or 60%. I can't remember the data, but it was for Mother Teresa was also there, and Michael Jordan was the highest at 64%. But then they asked, who would go? What about you yourself? 89% of people said, I'm definitely going to heaven. So if there's a gap in expectations of others versus ourselves, then we will have a tough time in changing. That introspection is required, right? So that's what I mean by being true to yourself. So when you're sitting alone in your room, and we spend our lives consuming things, just pause for a moment and ask yourself, really, did I do the right things today? Did I really contribute the way I should have been contributing? How many times have you spent alone for 5 minutes at home? Just alone. No noise. 5 minutes is not much time. So I started doing that more and more, and now I'm up 30 minutes, right?
Is that meditation? Okay, and you're asking yourself questions. You're being with yourself.
You're in the beginning, right? And then you get to a certain stage. Everybody has their form. But all I'm asking is just spend 5 minutes with yourself. You owe it to yourself.
Yeah.
And being true, because when you start believing in and that's when your journey you just explained, that inner voice. As you follow, like that inner voice, when I turned around and went through that crowd, I was following my inner voice. My heart was telling me to go to that monk, right? I mean, we can say, but in other situations too, in work situations, follow your heart. Voice what you feel is right. We all know what's right. We all know what's wrong. There's no rocket science to this. Moral fiber, I'm coining the term. Morality is knowing your values, right? Knowing these values. We all know. I mean, there's most of the world is in some form of religion. That's the second thing the Dalai Lama is all about. So his first thing is, promoting human values. His second thing is promoting openness of different religions. And so they're all preaching the right thing. It's now acting on those things. I know this sounds so simple, but that's what I coin as knowing and acting on your values. Living your values every day. Right?
And that takes pausing. That's the thing.
It takes the awareness.
Yeah, which most people, and thanks to the electronic devices that you helped create in Silicon Valley, thank you, Vij, it actually gives us all a great reason not to be with ourselves. I mean, the last time, if you see anyone put alone in a room, they'll have their phone out within 30 seconds because it's uncomfortable being with yourself to a certain extent. And spend now another 5 minutes and 20 minutes and start asking yourself hard questions. You really don't want to be with yourself because most likely you've used the phone and the food and the TV and the Kardashians to distract yourself from having hard conversations with yourself about what you should be doing with your family, with your job, with your body, with all of these things. And so most people these days, it's just postpone, postpone, postpone. It's easier to do than ever now. And so that's why I think this isn't the time to talk about this stuff. And so without a meditation practice, sometimes it's hard to get in that space where you get to be with yourself.
Yes.
You know,
they say the average lifespan, I was just reading this the other day, the average lifespan, I'm being general here, is that from what I saw was 78 years, right? We live 78 years if we're living healthy. And 1/3 of that is sleeping, right? With the exception of you and I probably, but 1/3 of that is 1/3 you sleep, 1/3 sleeping. And then you spend 10 years, they say, working. 9 years, they tabulate, was like consuming some type of form of consumption of entertainment, TV, just consuming, right? So they went through all this and they were like, you have 9 years left, right? What are you going to do with it? Well, I've kind of pushed back in my mind. I'm like, it's not even about that. It's not about what we do. It's how we do it. And that's why I talk about values. Because you talk about, it's your journey. It's the things that you're doing. If we focus on how we do these things more than what we attain or what we do, right? It makes the difference of who we are as a society and as individuals.
Yeah, and it's a hard lesson to get across.
Takes time, I guess, right?
Yeah, the how we do is a hard one.
It's hard.
Media, it's crazy. We have a course here that we teach 6 weeks long called our Life Accelerator. And the first week, we put everyone on a low media diet. So we only allow them to have 60 minutes of media. That means a book, TV, Netflix, anything. At the same time, they do mindfulness practice and they do a gratitude practice. And the first week, they all report like, oh my God, it's uncomfortable, but I've never had these kind of epiphanies, because they're forced to spend time with themselves, and they start flushing out a lot of stuff they've been literally postponed for years, because it's always easier to check the Twitter feed or check the this feed or be worried about someone's life or be worried about some crisis in some country that has nothing to do with you. So just that pause, and you're saying it right there. I think it's important to take that step back. I want to ask you a question. Why do you think SHAWN VIJ was so angry? Why were you so angry? And what was it the culmination of? If it was from inside you, from the outside, I see a guy who worked for Microsoft, worked for Intel, worked for all these great companies, has a huge house, beautiful daughter. I met her, she's wonderful. You got all these things, not to mention all the juice you have in the corporate world, and you're very humble, but I know you're known as the guy that makes deals, and you've done that stuff. Why were you so unhappy?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with I let greed take over. I let greed. So as you were thinking about, you were your own inspector inside. I grew up in, I don't know if your viewers have watched this, but it's 8 Mile. I grew up in Detroit.
Detroit, okay.
In a really rough neighborhood.
Bad area of Detroit.
Bad. It wasn't a bad. It was like I would say low middle class. My parents were immigrants from India. I came here when I was like 1 year old. I'm pretty much all American, and kind of grew up in Detroit. And as I was growing up, I went through there was a lot of racism, and there was a lot of segregation, right? And it didn't help that the economy wasn't doing so good. So all these factors kind of came in, and as I was growing up, I thought the only way out was I had to make money. I had to make money to get out of this. And I just started fixating on that, the big home, these things. And most kids do that, right?
Yeah.
They start looking at the Michael Jordan on the billboard, right? And you start looking at there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Just have a conscious approach toward it.
Do it the right way.
Do it the right way, and make sure everybody has the opportunity to do that. Look, if you look at studies, how much does the U.S. consume versus everywhere else? There needs to be a balance, right? So that greed, balancing that greed, right? When I self-interest takes over somebody else's, that's not the right way. That's not the right way. I'm all for that. In fact, when I met with, so I met His Holiness, but one of the things I met with after I met with His Holiness was the ex-Prime Minister, Professor Samdang Rinpoche.
Right, ex-Prime Minister of Tibet.
Of Tibet.
Right.
When they got exiled, and so I had that meeting with him in California. And when I met with him, we were talking, and he's a monk, and And
what's he like? I mean, that's crazy.
yeah, it was
You must
crazy.
have some stories.
And I asked him. We just started talking and we were riffing, like kind of like what we're doing now, but not this long. But we were talking for like 20 minutes or so. And I said to him, I'm not a monk. I'm a capitalist, right? I just came from a big event, but I really, after meeting His Holiness and meeting a lot of you, I feel like there's something here we can bridge, right? There's an opportunity here, and that felt like my calling at that moment. And it spoke to him. And he's on the Dalai Lama for Ethics Foundation at MIT. He works with a lot of different universities around the world. And so he's like, here's my card and email me. This is the monk, right? And Professor Rinpoche. And I said, great. So we started corresponding over email. And that was amazing. And so we just kicked off ideas, ways to approach things. But that to me was a big door to kind of get in and start thinking about how do we help, because I think a lot of value can come from universities. We can help students. I mean, we're at an age now, Brian, right, where there's an opportunity to give back. And I've interviewed a lot of people at Harvard, professors who teach ethics courses, Darden, and I've talked to professors at Michigan, and they're asking me now to come and speak at different schools, which I'm really happy to, because I feel like there's an opportunity there to kind of share the learning.
Let me ask you that question. If you had taught this to 19-year-old Rose and Vij, right, gone to the Sloan School and Michigan Tech or wherever, University of Michigan afterwards, do you think you could have straightened us out to have more fulfilling lives or done things better or made a more positive impact in the world?
Yes. I don't think it's not the silver bullet, but I think every influence matters. It's better than to your point, we are what we consume. But I do think people watching your show are consuming this, not this, but all the other podcasts or all the other things that you put out there, good-hearted things, versus watching MTV, right? Yeah. So I think it does have an influence. It's the frequency, obviously, right? We got to get into that, and but I do think the more positive things that we put out there tend to be more positive.
I think it would make a difference if you could get me to listen to it at 19. Why write a book, dude? Because like people think like, oh, Vij writes books.
Yeah.
This was
my first book,
right?
And I was like, what? And yeah.
I mean,
I didn't even know it was going to go anywhere. In fact, the foreword from the Dalai Lama, when I got the foreword, I was ecstatic. I walked in that morning for coffee because I was going to my dentist, and I got an email saying His Holiness is going to be reviewing the foreword, and we will let you know. We may have to do some edits. And I'm like, yeah, just call me anytime, just whatever you need, right? And
because it's a big deal for him to write the foreword.
It's a big deal, right? And the forward is really powerful, and so I think it was a big deal.
Yeah, you called me and you read the whole thing to me on the phone. That's how big of a deal it was. And it was a very big deal. At night in London. I was like, all right, Vij. But you were very excited, as you should be.
I was so excited in the morning. When I got the actual forward in the morning, I went into Pete's Coffee, my usual place.
By the way, do they pay you to say their name all the time?
Yeah, like Peyton Manning. Budweiser. But I walked in and I just bought everybody coffee. I was so excited, and I went to Whole Foods, and it was such a joyful moment, and it literally brought tears to my eyes, and it even made me want to do this more. It made me even want to do this more, and hopefully I get to see His Holiness in probably in another month or so.
Okay.
He's going to be speaking at UC San Diego.
And so after that meeting with him that day, you just thought to yourself, I got to take this energy, this momentum I'm feeling, and do something more than fix Vij. That's what you were feeling, yeah?
Yeah, totally. I felt like when I wrote this, I said, the root cause of why I wrote this was when I opened that pocketbook, I changed when I read that.
Yeah.
And the Dalai Lama book. Okay. And I said to myself, if somebody can take just one or two sentences, if I can change one person's life, like that changed me, then I feel good. That was the real reason. And then all of a sudden, Like, I started socializing it to all these, like, the editors at Fortune and all these other people, and they were liking it, right? And then now it's like CEOs and other people and professors, and so I'm like, oh, I actually could write, right? Like, it was actually pretty good. So is it either right or it's actually a good story? So
I remember I was in San Francisco 2 years ago. I mean, almost to the date or something. It was April, I think. And you were like, I'm going to write a book. I'm like, write the book. And, but, it was just, it was brainstorming. I did push it because I love you and I know you got a great message. And, this is real. I think that's why people are feeling it. This is real. This
took
really
2 years to write it, but yeah, it's real.
But I mean, that's a good sign, I think, because you had to dig all this stuff out. You're not a professional writer, but these are all stories about your life, about growing up in Detroit with that background, about having that capitalistic dream, about all of your experiences in different forms of corporate life, been on both ends of, hard decisions, unfair things, and seeing how it all played out, not to mention your own, come to whatever moment, with the Dalai Lama.
Also, there's the other good thing is the colleagues. I got to give props to the colleagues and the other business people I interviewed, and having them part of it, and the professors. So it's a culmination of different viewpoints and what they've kind of gone through as well. So
Yeah, you've got a lot of people, giving you quotes and a lot of case studies in here as well. So my question is, what's next? Because a book's one thing.
Yeah.
This is a movement, Vij.
Oh, movement.
You need a podcast. You need a blog.
Okay.
You got to start the tour. You got to start speaking.
Speaking for sure. Tour for sure. So those things are happening. Those things will start happening.
Okay. What about media?
Media, yes. I'm going to be doing media on the tour. You're the first one. So
thank you.
Yeah. Well, I got a lot of love for you, Brian. So this is good, and you've taught me a lot too. So I'm really happy. But it's the media and all of this. But I think it's really, to start with, is the universities. Because Professor Rinpoche, and I really want to do that, because one of the other things, if you ask me, what do you want to do 18 months from now, right? And, one of the goals is to go back into companies, which I am in, but to go back at the board level and really, really, institute some change. Right? Let's be really real in the boardroom, right? There's things that are on the website, and then there's things behind the firewall. That requires introspection. I'm not going to call out any companies. We all know. And companies that are doing it right, they're behind it. Right? And I call out a lot of great companies in there.
Yeah.
And now, let me remind you, some companies, not every company's perfect. Look, companies aren't toxic. Companies aren't toxic. It's the people that are in those companies that can make it toxic. Companies are large, right? I've spent a lot of time at Microsoft. There were some great places I worked at Microsoft. I had the best times. We did so much. It was challenging. And then there's pockets that aren't so good, right? Let's be really real. And when it comes to, at the leadership level, having that introspection, and really, really get into the bowels of the company, right? Not, hey guys, what's going on? No, really go in and see the different areas and pockets of a company, and really have those, conversations. That's when it becomes real.
Okay. So go in at board level.
Go to board level,
to really adopt this whole idea, because again, there's a lot of window dressing that goes on. Every corporation has a basic ombudsman and all that nonsense, but it doesn't really get exercised.
Yeah, and conscious capitalism, right? I'm not saying, look, I'm a strong believer also, we got to let people go. And companies are businesses. There's a P&L involved. I'm a strong believer in that. But how we do it in letting people go makes the difference. It can either stain the environment or it can make it productive. I'm talking the environment internally and externally in the community. And these communities, it's a small world. The community is global now. Look at United Airlines just recently. What's up with that?
What do you make of that?
Right. I mean, you know, I heard John Kasich even talk about it, and
Simon Sinek said something. He was in here, the Start With Why guy, and he's recently said some things about millennials. And someone asked him about it, and he said it's leadership. It's corporate leadership is the reason that happened. And I don't know what you think, but he said the values of these people were not told from the top that these are important. These ethical things were important to us. What's important was getting these people off the plane.
Well, a lot of companies, they have their values. Yeah. They have their values. The problem is they're on the water fountain or in the, you know, the drinking fountain, and they're stuck there. They're not living their values, right? And I would implore people to make sure that your core values are congruent with some of those values, and then make sure that they're living them. Yeah, he's right. Okay, we can say that. Yeah, but now let's go in, and the only way to do that is to voice the change, voice your values.
How does United fix itself with something like moral fiber?
Do we have 2 more hours?
I mean, I know you go into a lot of your IP in here, and it's fascinating stuff, you know, with the 4 Ds, and you talk about a company, but do you think that if you could walk into the boardroom armed with moral fiber and United Airlines and get carte blanche for, you know, 6 months, that you could go in and put in the processes and the mindsets to make a change?
Yeah, at the individual level, right? Which I think companies like, right? They're looking at attrition, they're looking at productivity, they're looking at liability, they're looking at all of these things. They're looking at, I mean, look how much companies put into ethical compliance, right? In policing employees, versus this takes a different approach. Right?
This is kind of empowering the individual.
And what do employers look at? That helps my P&L.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's how I'm going to do it.
Okay. I like it. Lead with reward. And in the long term, these decisions make a company very successful. It gets the right people, makes the people feel good, keeps the environment not toxic, but it's a long-term play that some companies don't see because they see the short-term P&L.
That's correct.
And a public company with quarterly results on Wall Street, this is the dilemma.
This is a dilemma, and that's true. That's true. But, you know, every company has their short-term strategy and their long-term strategy. You can still do and meet the quarterly. You can hit the street. You can do those things. You can meet that. But the street values shareholder value, right? Shareholder value. I'm not going to teach but you know where I'm going with it. But it's a time for us to change what we value. And companies that see that are highlighted in the book.
And the ones that aren't in the book aren't doing very well.
No, I'm not saying
that.
Okay.
So look, there's all sorts of great stuff in there, but they're going to have to buy the book to find out about the 4 Ds. And then, look, you relate a lot of these things in Buddhism in here, whether it's...
You're in the book.
I'm in the book, thank you, page 178, 179. Just by those 2 pages is all you need to. But no, it was a real honor being in there. And
thank you for that, Brian. It was really good perspective, and I think it'll help a lot of people.
You know, you've been telling me this stuff the last couple of years. You're like, Brian, you're doing this, and you're doing similar stuff, but until I read the book, I didn't know what the hell you were talking about. But it's weird how we ended up in a similar place, isn't it? Maybe it's not weird.
I'm really going to like the beer tonight.
It's going to be really good. Dude, before I let you go, I got to ask you a few questions about you, Mr. SHAWN VIJ himself.
Oh, okay.
When you think of the word successful, who comes to mind? Could be any individual in the world, living, dead, anyone. Who comes to mind?
These success secrets are only available on the London Real Academy. Become a member and get access to live shows, exclusive courses, my webinars, bonus content, meetups, live events, an amazing community, and much, much more. Now back to the rest of the show.
I went to Royal Albert Hall a few years ago, and I actually saw His Holiness interviewed there. And what surprised me about him was he was really funny. And he was cracking jokes and just made everybody at ease at the same time. But, you know, you've spent some time with him. What is he like?
Very much like that. He puts you at ease, to your point. He's very disarming, right, when you meet with him. But he's very stern. He was stern with me, right? And he's very, it's interesting, yeah. He says so much by not saying so much. If that makes any sense. Very profound statements and comments. And like most of us have to think like an hour before we say something. him for, that's powerful. He that comes with practice. That's just, so I think he's very powerful. Everything, if you look carefully what he says everything with total mindfulness. He's mindful all the time. He's meditating all the time.
Economy of words.
Yes.
He's lived a crazy life, right?
Right.
Man, when you look at the history and, barely making it out of Tibet and then all of this stuff, I mean, that's a lot to meditate on.
Yeah, I mean, he's got three priorities, right? One, promoting human values. Two, promoting, with all these religions, the harmony of all these religions, right? I mean, you look at the world, it's like 2 billion people are Christian, half of them are Catholic, 1.6 billion are Muslim, right? You've got another billion of my ancestry in India, Hindus. You've got a 500 million of Buddhists that actually half of them live in China. So you got and then you've got atheists, but he believes what's so powerful about him is he unites everybody with those values. We all have the same core. We're all human. If you ever see him, what's powerful about him is he'll talk to everybody and anybody, right? There was one meeting he was in, I think, in the Netherlands, and they're like, well, our prime minister couldn't come. He's like, okay, let's go. He doesn't care. Let's just have that conversation with who's in the room. Whoever he's with at the time, he's with. Okay, he was with my daughter. My daughter, we brought some fruit for him, and he was eating the fruit from my dad's peach tree, and he was eating it, and he was like, "This is really good." It was just so intimate. And he's like, he's with you at the time, right? He doesn't have his cell phone, right? So like that, and then the third thing is you were talking about the Dalai Lama. The third thing that he focuses on is the preservation of Tibet, his culture, Buddhist Tibet.
Okay, but that's the last thing.
I don't know if they're all the same, but those are the three things that he focuses on. I don't think it's sequential in nature, right?
Right, but a lot of it is just human values.
Human values.
He's not like just the Buddhist guy or just the Tibet guy. He's like
and what I love about him and what I like about this book, what I love about that, he's very secular. He's like one of the most. He's like the sixth. There's all kinds of studies, but he's pretty renowned, right? And he's a compassionate leader.
Yeah.
He's a politician and a Buddhist monk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's only one like him. So, Mr. Vij, I always ask everybody here a couple questions at the end. I'm going to ask you these same questions, and they're interesting ones. If you could make a phone call to the 20-year-old SHAWN VIJ and give that young man a bit of advice. I guess he might have been at Ford. Maybe that was the year before, but it was right around the time I knew you. Give that young man a bit of advice, and you might as well get me on the phone at the same time and give me the same advice. What would you tell him and us?
Follow your heart. Look deep inside yourself and follow your heart. I know it sounds very cliche, but it's really true. And I call it courage. We all have choices in life. Choice is the biggest thing. We have choices not to say anything as well too, and just let things go by. But choose with your heart. Not, if you know it's wrong, just don't do it. That's what I would say. If you feel that little bit inner voice telling you, and you kind of hide it, and you kind of tuck it away, and you kind of say, you know what, the lobster tail tastes so good, and or whatever it is. We all know what it is. We all know what it is. Don't lie to yourself, Sean. Don't lie to yourself, Brian.
Because it'll come back anyways.
It will. And it's harder. So the display suffering, we all suffer. We cause our own suffering. The less true you are to yourself, the greater the suffering. Right? The more true to yourself, it's that simple. Because you have less to, you look at His Holiness. He's not one person at work and one person at home. He's the same person. He's direct, he's transparent, he's timely, he does everything, he says less burden for him. That's what I would tell myself. You don't have to worry. To your point, you don't have to come back and go through this whole process of, gosh, it took me this long to figure out, what I was, Is this what life's about? Maybe, I don't know. But
So what were we doing? Following our heads?
we were following our influences. At least I was.
Right.
And our influences, I'm not blaming our influences. I blame myself. But be open and mindful of everything around you. Right? And I would also tell myself, getting those things is not a wrong thing. I'm a strong believer in that. I believe in the free trade, and I believe in capitalism, and you have to have boundaries around those billboards. There needs to be boundaries.
Second part of that question, best advice you ever received your entire life. Could be from anyone, really. What comes to mind?
The Dalai Lama.
And which thing did he tell you that's the best advice?
Your greatest enemy is in you.
That might be our best one ever. Final question. There's a 20-year-old out there, young Vij, young Rose, that are watching this thing right now, listening to it somewhere, and thinking, one day I want to grow up and be like these guys, be like Vij, write books, work at these big companies, do great things with their lives. What advice do you give to them?
Do what your heart tells you. I mean, great things doesn't mean it has to be this or being in corporate America. Great things can be the littlest things, or what we consider littlest things, but they're great things. Make a difference in your environment that you're in. I live in Seattle. I try to do things that are now more local and try to help out things in that environment now. Get involved with the community. Make a difference in one person's life. That's a great thing. It could be your daughter, it could be your son, it could be your loved one, it could be a foster child. It could be, do great things.
Amen. I always say, just pump some value back into this human race. It's hard to believe. We're all a bunch of ants running around, but I believe we all are one. And I think when you pump the value back in is where all the rewards come and all the accolades, and you don't know why. And, I have students sometimes, and we have them here for the weekend in London, and I'll be like, do this super focus group, 150 people at night, and I have them jumping around and doing active meditation. And the next morning I'm in here and I did 20 interviews in a row. And then that night we're out to dinner, and the next day we're jumping in a cold pond, and they're like, Brian, where do you get this energy from? And I'm like, I get it from you guys because it feels good what I'm doing. Whereas back in my day, if I was doing it for me, half a day of that I'd have been like, yeah, I'm tired, I want to go home, this isn't much fun. So it's this secret that when you do these great things selflessly,
yes.
I'm sure the Dalai Lama will give me some points for saying that. It's amazing what happens to you,
It's crazy. I mean, when I started doing more of this, the universe started aligning. I shared this on the phone with you. I think it was a month ago. The universe started aligning toward me. I mean, actually it was the first time when we talked back a couple of years ago. I started doing more of this, following my heart and being true to myself. All of a sudden, things just started aligning. Right? Because you're true to yourself, and the universe realizes that. So, yeah.
There's something to it.
It
works that way.
It works that way.
And again, you have to constantly monitor yourself. And it's funny, I had something come up yesterday, kind of business-wise, and somebody was kind of not behaving very well in a business perspective. And actually, I had this opportunity to behave really poorly back to them. And it was kind of bothering me for a day or two. And I was actually training yesterday before my show. And I was in the middle of training, and I wrote myself an email. That's how I write myself notes. And I was just like, you know what? Just pay him, settle it. And I just wrote him a note. I said, you know what? You can choose to be that way. I said, I'm not going to go down in the gutter with you. Yeah. So here you go. I said, I wish you lots of luck. And I actually said, thank you. Thank you for doing that, because it's shown me that I'm going to take this route. And it must be because you were coming into town, goddammit, and your Moral Fiber book. And I was just like, you know what? And I'm never, the money is not, I'm never going to remember it after 2 days. In the long run, who knows? And I just thought, you know what? I'm going to go this way because that's who I want to be.
Good.
But the old Rose would have been like, no, you didn't do that. And I got one up on you. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
And all these one-ups and these haters, and let go, detach. I talk about, they got to buy the book. But I talk about it. But I talk about the whole detachment process. Yeah.
Let's talk about this book. Where can they get a copy? Moral Fiber. I'm telling you, from what you're telling me, this thing is going to be huge. It's going to be sold out everywhere. It's going to be sold in a lot of stores that people might be going to.
Yeah.
What can you say? What can't you say about this?
Well, right now I can say it'll be on Amazon. I'm still working with distributors. It'll be at Whole Foods. It'll be at some place. It'll be out there.
So when I go buy my organic produce, I got to look at you in the checkout line and see this book.
I'm hoping. We're still working that out, but yes, I'm hoping.
All right, so they can pre-order a copy probably on Amazon.
Amazon for sure, and then I'm working on the other distribution. I'm still in the process of all that, but
okay. Vij, I mean, look, I don't know what to say, man. I mean, makes me want to tear up, man. I'm so impressed with you, the changes you made as a human. Let alone you got this beautiful book to show for it. I read the whole thing. It's amazing. It's real. I think that's why people grab onto it. You're real. You tell a true story about something that happened. These people are feeling you. So I'm so proud of you. One thing you must insist that you do is that this is a movement. This is the beginning, buddy. And you know this, but like you kind of own this thing now, and now you owe everybody. So for the next 10 years, I want the Moral Fiber podcast.
Okay.
I want the next couple books coming in, and I think, again, look at the media. Everyone's watching the Kardashians. I think, honestly, you need to be pumping out a podcast every 2 weeks where you interview people and continue with this message, because, you know, it's all about repetition these days, and everyone needs to hear it in different forms. Some people read books. These days, all the young kids listening to podcasts, listening to things on the airways, and they need to hear this message, because young Brian would have needed a bunch of different mediums to get this into his head.
You know, it's funny. So when the books came in at the UPS store, so I went to go pick them up. I didn't even know. I thought it was something else. I picked it up, and the guy, this older fella, so I go, "Do you have a knife? Can I open this?" He's like, "Yeah, here's a knife." So he opens it. Older guy. He's owned this UPS store for like 30 some years or whatever, or 20 years, and he opens it up, and the book, I saw the book for the first time in the cover, and he goes, "Huh, what is that? Moral fiber. We could all use some of that." But that was really, it was really profound, right? Like that was the first thing he said.
Wow.
So to your point, I think we could all use a little bit of that.
It's a good case study.
So, but thanks. And likewise, Brian, likewise. You know, I'm just amazed. I've said this so many times. It just, if I look back and I should have brought, I'm gonna get those photos for you. I have the photos of us when we were 19 in those cubicles, hanging out, doing crazy stuff. But I look back and I mean, can I tell this story? I gotta tell this story.
Tell me a story.
You don't remember this, but we had to go to Cedar Point, the roller coaster.
Okay, yeah.
Remember that?
I think I remember us going
there.
there.
And this is how rebellious you were. So we went on this ride called the Gemini, and it was a roller coaster that goes to the top. So Brian's like, yeah, ride with me, Vij. And I'm like, okay, right? Thinking, you know, he's a good guy. So we're sitting down, and back then they had a bar, and then they had a seatbelt, right? But the problem was the bar was not close. Like nowadays it's close, but the bar was way out here, right? So we're riding on that thing, and the seatbelt's on, and we get to the top. You remember this?
I do remember.
And then Rose looks at me on the left and goes, "Hey, Vij, you want to make it more exciting?" I go, yeah, sure. And you unbuckle the belt, and literally we're like hanging on this thing, or I am, and you're like, you didn't care if you died or not, but your hands were in the air. I'm like hugging this thing, thinking we're gonna die. I couldn't enjoy the ride at all, but that's what I remember of Rose, the crazy man. And now I see you, and I'm like, look at this. He's wearing vests and suits, and he's calm, and he's talking to all these people. So that's what I remember.
I'm still crazy, but I remember your reaction, so that was fun.
Yeah.
And I also remember one night when I came back and visited, we went out one night and we were partying a bit, and then we went up to that damn bridge in the middle of the night, and we jumped off the bridge into the water.
Jumped off the bridge.
And we were like holding on to like a power line on the bridge. And you're like, yeah, let's do it. And I jump, and I'm trying to show off, and I do a front flip into the water.
I remember that.
And I landed on my chest, and I lost my wind. And I started sinking in the water. I thought I was drowning, and you guys like rescued me.
Yeah.
And you took me back, you threw me back to your parents' car.
Crazy stuff, man. Like we didn't care, right?
I didn't care.
You didn't care for sure.
I think I was trying to kill myself.
I think you were just, I think the book would have helped you back then.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe I had to do all that crazy stuff. I don't know.
Anyways.
Look, Vij, it's been 27 years. It's crazy. I'm so proud of you.
Thanks, Brian.
I'm so glad I met you. I mean, I know this sounds like a cliche, but dude, I always knew you were a good guy, man. You had something inside you, something good about you. I didn't stay in touch with everybody there. Nobody else, really. You know, maybe one other guy. But, you know, you got some compassion in you and something really good about you, man. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of this whole thing. And I just want to see you take it to the limit and just give all this stuff back, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Brian.
You know, thank you so much as well, man. And it's great having you on London Real. As we say, it's about the journey, I wish you well in yours. Take Moral Fiber. Just take it to everybody.
I will.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Give me a hug.
Thanks, man.
Oh, man.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
The critics who always speak behind my back, maybe I want to hear them remind me, he's back, the great pretender. I hope this time he gets hurt. I love these guys. They give me fuel. If you want to reach your objective, you want to achieve it, you're gonna have to be obsessive. You're gonna have to be obsessed. Feel what you do. Feel it. If you're not feeling it, it doesn't matter.
Chris Eubank Jr. How do you explain his prowess in the ring?
Junior has that obsession, that genius, that magic. Genius is obsession, but it's in one area.
You studied the sweet science for so much of your life. How do you walk away from it? Do you miss it?
You can't walk away from it. I am it. And even when I dance, really I'm boxing. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, the one who strives valiantly.
What was the worst day of your life, and how has it shaped you as a human being?
When I fought Nigel Benn, I stood like this. It was to mask this. The risk must be taken. That's why you are London Reelers. That's why we're here. We're tired of sitting still, watching it happening for others. Let's do it.